Hello. Good morning, everyone. I think we're still gathering this. People are coming up here. That's very great. A very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is entitled Decoding the Article 6.4 Sustainable Development Tool, discussing first application cases. My name is Christoph Ahrens. I work for Wuppertal Institute in Germany, and I have the pleasure to take you through the next 60 minutes. This webinar is organized jointly by my institution, Wuppertal Institute, together with UNIP Copenhagen Climate Center. And together we conduct the Sustainable Development Initiative on the implementation of Article 6. I have a slight echo here now. Which I'm not sure what the reason is, but keep carrying on. Okay, I was saying this event is organized by the Sustainable Development Initiative on the implementation of Article 6, which already points to what we will be talking about today. That is the interconnections between sustainable development impacts and carbon market activities. But before we dive into the matter, I'd like to hand over the floor to Karen Olsen of UNIP Copenhagen Climate Center, sorry, to say a few introductory words. Karen, over to you.
Good morning, colleagues and friends from around the world. I'm Karen Olsen, Senior Advisor and Carbon Market Coordinator at the UNIP Copenhagen Climate Center, and one of the founders of the Sustainable Development Initiative that we launched back in 2017. And back then, this was together with the Gold Standard Foundation and with a lot of parties supporting what was then focused on a party-driven policy dialogue, trying to promote sustainable development in the Article 6 rulebook. So it was right after we had the Paris Agreement, and it was after many years of CDM implementation under the Kyoto Protocol. And our initiative was a reaction to sustainable development being peripheral and not operationalized at the international level in the CDM. So just a little bit of history that under the Clean Development Mechanism, sustainable development was defined exclusively as a national prerogative of host parties, which was their role to approve that a CDM project contributed to sustainable development. And there was no guidance really at an international level until 2014, when the CDM Executive Board approved a voluntary tool. And that was 13 years after CDM was operationalized. So it took a long time for this to gain recognition, not priced in the market. And in spite of this being a core objective, along with mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions, it was not really operationalized. So the Sustainable Development Initiative wanted to promote sustainable development so that going forward in the Paris Agreement and in Article 6, this would be different. And the SDI then, for 5 years, we promoted strong text provisions leading up to the Glasgow Rulebook adopted in 2026, in 21, COP26. And we were quite happy with the outcome. We did get stronger text provisions promoting sustainable development. It became a shall requirement and an overall objective stated in the preamble of Article 6, both for 6.4, for 6.2, and 6.8. And now that we got that in 21, our focus shifted. So we changed from supporting party-driven dialogue to implementation. And for 2 years, we supported the UNFCCC Secretariat, who again supported the supervisory body for the mechanism. A6.4 Paris Agreement crediting mechanism. And in 2024, we then, the board supervisory body adopted the A6.4 SD tool. And now what we will present today is that we have supported piloting the tool. It's only 1 year old. It's quite comprehensive. You will see a presentation of what it is by Juliane just now. It's very comprehensive with 3 forms. And in our piloting exercise that the panel has supported from different perspectives, we are looking into now what have we learned after 1 year, and how can we support building capacity for both designing activities that do promote and that monitor, report, and verify, which is entirely new. We didn't have that in the past. So this shows that today we have promoting sustainable development as a core element of what defines integrity. And I'm happy to say that this is not only in the context of PACM, it's in the carbon market as a whole, including the voluntary carbon market. You probably know the ICVCM core carbon principles and the assessment criteria. I am a subject matter expert for the ICVCM, and by coincidence, we will have later today, 4 o'clock, a webinar for the ICVCM presenting the continuous improvement work program with recommendations on how to promote sustainable development also in that context and converge towards best practice in PACM and also the independent standards that have own tools for promoting sustainable development with the intention of promoting a race to the top. So now that we have the tool, we can assess. That means there can also be information for pricing. Before it was internalized into the price of a ton, and now we will see how it gets priced. Can be labeled, tagged, and individually priced. What are the SD impacts? So that's who we are, what we've done for all these years and continue to do. We're quite dedicated to promoting sustainable development, and we're very happy for the donors that support the initiative. Sweden, Norway, Germany have supported throughout, and we are collaborating closely with strategic partners, primarily the UNFCCC Secretariat, also ERCST for the policy dialogue, ICVCM, and many others. So with this background, back to you, Christoph.
Right. Thanks for explaining the background and setting the scene for us. And we at Wuppertal are also very happy to be part of this initiative since 23 and for contributing to the new phase But without further ado, let's take a brief look at the agenda, what we'd like to do with you today. We will start with a presentation of the Article 6.4 SD tool and the lessons learned from early use cases. This will be presented by my colleague, Julian. This will be followed by an expert panel discussion with our distinguished panelists, which I'm going to introduce in a minute. And we will then have the opportunity to ask questions in a short Q&A session before we close with some concluding remarks. Now, let me briefly introduce our esteemed panelists. We have here with us today Ritika Tewari. Ritika is a seasoned carbon expert and works as climate policy and carbon markets expert with South Pole, a well-known consultancy and project developer. Welcome, Ritika. Then have Shivaj Sharma. Shivaj SustainCert, auditing company, which recently got accredited as designated operational entity of the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism. And he will bring in the VVV perspective today. Shivaj, happy to have you on board today here with us. Last but not least, I'm very glad to have Martin Liambay with us on the panel. Martin is a project development expert specialized in renewable energy and natural resource management. He's based in Lusaka, Zambia. Welcome, Martin. Now, What all the panelists have in common, and Karen alluded to that earlier, they have all contributed in one way or the other to our SD tool piloting report and exercise. So let me thank you here for all your support and contributions in this process right now here. And before we start our discussion on experiences with the tool, let's briefly hear an introduction. What is the tool? What does it look like? How does it work? And what are the main lessons we derived? Over to you, Julian.
Thank you, Christoph, and thank you, Karen, and hello, everybody. It's great to have so many of you here. Yeah, and well, I will now present our lessons learned with regard to the application of the A6.4 SD tool and the first piloting. Over to the next slide, we will have a look on the agenda. So first of all, I will present to you the tool. What is it about? What does it contain? Then I will give you an overview of the different pilots, the way we piloted the SD tool, and then I will show you what were the main challenges identified and what are our core recommendations. Next slide, please. So basically, the A6.4 SD tool is mandatory for all activity participants under Article 6.4, so PACM, Paris Agreement's crediting mechanism, and it was adopted by the supervisory body of the mechanism last year, as Karen already mentioned. The aim of the tool is to prevent any harm that could result from the activities, so basically safeguarding as the one element, and the other element of the tool is also the mapping of potential positive and negative impacts on SDGs. The practical setup of the SD tool is based on 3 Excel forms, which are mandatory to use for project developers. The first form is the risk assessment form. It contains like a detailed questionnaire with 11 safeguarding elements. Then the second Excel form is the environmental and social management plan, which addresses any risks that were identified before. And the third form is the Sustainable Development Impact form, which contains 3 steps. First of all, project proponents are requested to identify host party SD priorities. Then in a second step, it is requested to identify affected SDGs. And in a third step, project proponents are required to establish SD level indicators at the project level for monitoring the potential impacts. And in contrast to CDM, so Clean Development Mechanism, the tool includes mandatory monitoring, reporting, as well as validation and verification by DOEs. Next slide, please. So what we did in the piloting was, first of all, selecting cases. So in the last month, we've analyzed early applications of the tool in different activity contexts. So the first context is the context of projects transitioning from CDM to PACM. The second case is a real-life mitigation activity in Zambia under Article 6, which is supported by SDI donors. And then a third case was a case where the tool was applied ex post to a carbon market activity. We also called it a virtual case. And methodology-wise, we did interviews with consultants and also like a document assessment of the A6.4 forms, which were submitted by the cases either directly to us or already to the Secretariat requesting a transition from CDM to PACM. Next slide, please. So what were the main challenges that were identified in the analysis? So first of all, the data collection for the SD tool is prescribed as resource and time intensive. There's a need for stakeholder input and stakeholder interaction, expert judgment, for example, assessing various national documents such as relevant climate policy documents, SDG strategies, gender action plans, biodiversity policies, and this process is difficult for activity proponents, especially because the documents can't be accessed at one place. Yeah. So the second challenge we identified is the establishment of SD indicators at the activity level. So there is a gap between the national and or universal SDG targets on the one hand, which are rather generic and at the macro level. And then on the other hand, we have the need for operationalization at the activity level, so the micro level. The third challenge we've identified is that the SD tool is manual and poorly digitalized, so there's no digital interface but Excel forms, as I've already mentioned. And there is, for example, need for double entries, which is called Excel burden. And the tool, could learn from other standards from the VCM in this context. Other challenges were rather at the technical level. So what was identified are overlaps and repetitions in the safeguarding elements, a lack of guidance for filling out the forms. So the examples given in the forms are considered to be too generic and of little help. And the overall language is prescribed as being too technical. Over to the next slide. What SDI is recommending is, first of all, to develop predefined standardized SDG indicators at the sector or already at the activity level that would help activity participants to monitor SD impacts. A second recommendation is the idea to consider facilitating activity participants' access to crucial host party documents and regulations such as host parties' SD priorities or further relevant policies. Then another recommendation from SDI is to begin to work towards a digitalized web-based platform for assessing SD impact and safeguards, and to incorporate automated workflows and interactive features. And this would also include like systematic cross linkages between related data entry forms. And lastly, SDI is suggesting to support uptake and usage of the tool through targeted capacity building, for example, webinars, explanatory videos, and dedicated online help desks, especially for first-time users. Thank you so much.
Right. Thanks, Juliane, very much for this comprehensive, compact, actually, tour d'horizon, our study and also about the tool. Like now, directly turn to our panelists and colleagues. If you can, please turn on your cameras. I'd like to start our discussion with a recap of your most important takeaways from the piloting, since you were all involved in applying the SD tool in one way or the other. So what were the things you found most striking or remarkable? I cannot just see her at the moment, but Ritika, would you be ready to start with some first impressions?
Yes, certainly, Christoph, and
Great.
thank you. Super. So first of all, thank you for having me, and congratulations to UNEP and Wuppertal Institute on finalization of this study. Very timely that we take stock of a tool that has taken such a long course in the history of UN mechanisms to be operationalized. Just to perhaps give this audience some context, we applied the A6.4 SD tool for a CDM POA that we are in the process of transitioning to PACM. The overarching POA or program of activities is now registered with PACM. For those of you in the audience that may be new to the CDM transition process, parties agreed to allow eligible CDM projects that receive an approval from host countries within a defined time frame to be re-registered with PACM. And once the host country approves this transition or communicates its approval to the UNFCCC, additional documentation needs to be submitted to show compliance with new PACM rules. And one of those rules and the documentation is the submission of the 3 forms that Juliana referred to in her presentation. So what we've submitted that for our POAs, and still we are in initial stages of the sort of on the PACM activity cycle, let's say. So in that sense, I consider our experience with the SD tool still early stage. Against that clarification, I do have a few takeaways, which I was reflecting upon as Juliana was summarizing very succinctly the study on our overall experience with the tool. Right. Overall, I think, actually, as very much aligned with the brief history of time that Karen mentioned, and I remember being part of that history as well, and following the development of the CDM checklist, for example. So coming from that background, I think adoption of the A6.4 SD tool overall is a really meaningful step up for the UN Carbon Standard, right? Because for the first time, sustainable development is a mandatory and structured, is reported under a mandatory and structured framework, and not just reported in a narrative add-on manner, but the intention is for it to be something that can be subject to validation, verification, and an ongoing monitoring. Plus, of course, the fact that one has to assess and manage potential negative impacts in line with do no harm principles. That itself, I think, is a welcome step forward. From looking at the tool and our experience with the tool, from a coverage and comprehensiveness perspective, I attest that we found the tool to be a solid reference point, right? And we have in our teams a lot of experience with voluntary carbon market standards that have been moving the needle in this regards. And so we found the tool at par with the assessment provisions that are in these standards, and in some cases going beyond as well, right? On usability, I think for this particular project we had no big challenges because we this is a CDM project that at some point also looked towards gold standards, sustainable development requirements, and so for no big challenges for this said project. But that said, I think the ease of use may not be uniform for a tool of this comprehensiveness, and what perhaps may be critical is prior experiences in using sort of SD tools that have an MRV ability element to them. Also, I think the nature of project is important here, particularly on reflecting which SDGs are being impacted. That may lead to different user experiences of the tool, in my reading. I think in that respect, perhaps from my perspective, one of the more challenging aspects in practice may be that the tool currently requires activity participants to themselves define project level sustainable development indicators, right? And of course their contribution to the outlined SDGs, and that provision doesn't exist in the tool per se yet. Depending on, I think, then SDGs selected, this can, in my reading, be conceptually or practically demanding. It was not the case for us for this project, but that may be a challenge that one sees when using the tool. However, that said, I think that reflects the broader issue that the report also highlights, right? Which is the sort of differentiation between SDGs that are formulated as global and national goals, and very granular nature of carbon market projects. So that's something I have a reflection on. And finally, probably a practical observation, also in line with the report, the outputs of the SD tool are intended to be used in stakeholder consultations, right? And in my reading, there is still a room, perhaps over time, to simplify parts of the language that the tool uses, just to ensure that while the rigor remains, the outputs are still accessible to local stakeholders and in the consultation process. I would stop there and giving you back, Christoph.
Thanks, Ritika, for these insights, and also for your look back into CDM times and the side look at gold standards. It's always important to have comparisons to what worked back in the past and how the other standards work. And yeah, happy to delve into selected matters later on in the discussion. But now I'd like to take the tour around the panel. So maybe over to you, Martin. You did quite a lot of work on the ground recently in Zambia. So could you share with us your most important takeaways from your recent activities?
Thank you. Yeah, just to refresh my memory, it was quite an interesting activity. Are you able to get me clear? Yeah, perfect. Yes. Using the SD tool on the Zambian, one of the Zambian project, which was the Article 6.2 mechanism. It was quite an interesting initiative, and it brought out quite a lot of lessons. Yeah, despite this, like from the previous presentation, we foresaw some challenges that came out because one has to take note, like this was the first time for such a piloting to take place in Zambia. So basically for some of the stakeholders, it was something new for them. So you find like in terms of data, you find like most of the data was disaggregated, you find like it was spread across different sectors. So the positive part is that Zambia is one of the countries that has established a ministry that is responsible for green economy and environment. And it's a ministry that is responsible for Article 6.2, Article 6.4, or let me say the carbon credit market in Zambia. So they also took up some initiative, for instance, to put up the Green Economy and Climate Change Act. They also have a statutory instrument on carbon market regulation. They also have a carbon market framework. So basically, I think they did much of the work to ensure that the market on carbon credit is well organized. So they also already identified some stakeholders who could be consulted on this. So basically, this was like more like an entry point for the piloting. But despite this, what we saw is that engaging the stakeholders, especially those who are working like the gender division that is under the office of the vice president. They already have some, let's say, the gender action plan for Zambia. They also, you find like some information, you find like they have to speak to different sectors. Despite the information speaking to different sectors, you find like at least most of them, they are still contributing to the country's goals on the NDC. But one thing that was coming out even just from the stakeholders, and one thing I think one of the key takeaways was that the whole tool was new to them. They wish they had like a pre-run, or maybe more like a capacity building was done before even the data collection. So basically the whole piloting exercise, somehow it worked as an advantage for some advantage, because it was more like capacity building. At the same time, you are collecting data. So maybe the only thing is maybe the next, maybe another piloting or maybe another project that to undertake could also collect some information to see whether they still have some memories or they would have advanced more on just to see how prepared they are, like maybe just to see how knowledgeable they are on the tool from the first time they were engaged on this one. Yeah, I think this is just the smaller key takeaway. I don't want to preempt some of the information for the next discussion. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Martin. And yeah, it's very good that you brought up the issues of capacity building, which we will certainly come back later in the discussion, but also data gathering, also one of the bottlenecks that we think all of us. Yeah, maybe let's turn to our colleague Shivraj now. And you looked at things from the auditor's perspective. So we're thrilled to hear what you are bringing to the table here today. Over to you, Shivraj.
Thanks, Christoph. Thanks for having us here. I think it is pretty interesting development that we have been having. And earlier times, I remember that it used to be a kind of boutique thing that would add value to the project offering usually. But now it's no more that. It is definitely the need of the hour. And the most important takeaways in our eyes is that it is the alignment part, because even though we know that there is a lot desired is left there, but we see an alignment coming from not only from the international development that is happening from the SDGs, the 2030 agenda that is linked with the national priorities, and then aligning that with the project activity related indicators. So in a way, we see at a broader level that alignment is taking place, which is much needed, to be honest. So that is something that this tool brings with this implementation part. So the alignment and the reliability is important. Comprehensiveness, as we have seen that SDGs do no harm principles are coming and much more rigorously applied. Though sometimes I feel that it is more rigorous rather than helping or at least making sure that it becomes more practical. So we can definitely improve there. But that is also something very important, that bringing all the critical aspects related to a project which can actually affect the communities at large are being considered. That is really important. The third point that we feel is that the stakeholder engagement part. I think we earlier discussed that we have observed that stakeholders are really important, and the inputs usually are taken, but at very periodic level or at the beginning of the when we start an activity. So later on, the continuous approach that has been brought by this SD tool is really remarkable. So these three typical highlights that I can see the takeaway. And the fourth, at least from the review's perspective, is the mandatory part. I have heard a lot of lot of time this particular word being spoken about, mandatory. So yes, this is something which sets this apart from the VCM that we see, is that none of the project, no other program out there have it embedded into the project cycle. Therefore, it has really critical aspect, meaning that it's not like we were able to do, but we couldn't cross the last mile. No, you have to make that effort. And if you read para 101 and 106 of the tool, if the project participant is not able to comply with the requirement, it might result in negative opinion issuance for validation or verification. So it means that it is a very much integrated part. Like when we do an validation, we know that additionality. When we do the verification, we know that monitoring of certain parameters are very critical. I think that is the level of importance that has been brought to the SD tool, which is really important. So these were the first four takeaways that I could think of. And of course, for the areas of development we have seen a lot. I think from Julian's slide, we could see that there's a lot more that we can improve, and it's a continuous process. I remember that when the earlier versions came in for the different, even for the CDM standard, and how it evolved. So I think the journey would continue. I think we'll bring more and more objectivity to it. Most likely, what I feel is digitalization is really important in the current age and time. I think digital approach would actually help a lot, making sure that it will become more flexible and could improve the usability significantly. That's really important. Maybe also adding, I think capacity building was the point I think Martin was mentioning before, that becomes really important, that not all the stakeholders associated with this should have the continuous a mechanism or a place or a platform where they could build their capacity, or we could have targeted workshops where we can engage with different stakeholders at the same time, I would say, so that understanding from both all the sides can be improved, or make it a kind of benchmark where, and maybe developing some dynamic examples, case studies available on the platform itself would actually help a lot. And just the last point regarding that, I mean, these 3 pilots were excellent. I think we should multiply these pilots. It will actually bring in a lot more value. So thanks. Over to you.
Thanks, Rivaj, for this. And yeah, thanks also for bringing up the continuous improvement process, which actually is foreseen within the tool. There's revisions every 18 months. And actually the next revision is going to take place in May 26. So there's also maybe of interest for the audience. So there will be ways to interact with the SPM, but we can touch upon that later also during the discussion. I'd like to deep dive into a few selected issues with the panelists here now before going to the question and answer session. And I noticed there's a question already in the chat. This is noted, and I will gladly bring it up in the Q&A later on. Yeah, with the view to the time is flying as usual. Let me delve quickly into one matter that we wanted to take a closer look into, and this is the what we call the macro-micro gap. And Ritika has mentioned this earlier. It is quite challenging to bridge this gap between international SDGs, national level plans, such as joint action plans or the like, and the individual project level. So yeah, maybe Ritika, could you enlarge a little bit more on this point, and possibly you also have some suggestions for tackling the issue?
Sure. Thanks, Christoph. I think while we didn't face this particular issue in our project type, from my experience of working on carbon markets, and as I said before, I think this macro gap between SDGs and project level indicators is a conceptual challenge in applying any tool that's dedicated to quantifying and MRVing SDGs supportive sort of SDG supportive development impacts, right? So I think it's not necessarily a challenge only for the A6.4 tool, I would say, as it is for any tool that is trying to achieve the same purpose, right, of a quantified output towards SDG achievement, or contribution towards SDG achievement. Maybe just to elucidate on, or at least my view on the challenge, it's fairly simple, right? SDGs and their indicators, they are designed to track progress at global level and then translated at a national level. Now, many of those indicators therefore have a systemic nature rather than a granular one, right? And as compared to project level indicators, which are very specific to impacts done by the project, either directly or indirectly due to the due to the intervention we're talking about. And my sense is that only a small share of the 200 plus official SDG indicators that exist could directly be applied 1:1 at a project level, which means that then you require a translation in a way of the SDG targets that are global and nationally defined to what a project could kind of achieve, contribute towards, right? I think in practice, project level SDG indicators, sorry, I hear, yeah. Super. It was hearing a background noise. So I think in practice, project level SDG indicators, they work best probably where the causal chain between the activity and the outcome is short and it's observable, right? For example, SDG 8 on decent work. I think that's one where employment conditions and labor standards, they can directly be linked to the project. The causal chain is short and observable, and therefore a direct translation into a project level indicator is easier to do. That becomes much harder when the indicator is that you're looking at, or the SDG you're looking at, is more systemic or economy wide. A good example is maybe SDG 10, which talks about reduced inequities. Now, indicators on inequities are usually, or these matrices are usually designed for national or for a national or supranational level, and therefore sort of converting them meaningfully into project level individual activities is harder. I was part of actually a study long before my time at South Pole, where we tried to quantify how much is that difference, and roughly, and this was funded by Germany, this study, which actually quantified that roughly 4% of SDG indicators can be directly applicable at project level, and an additional 30% which could be applied indirectly if you carefully design proxy indicators. But that leaves a big percentage to SDGs that can only be treated as contextual markers, right, rather than clear performance matrices. So essentially, I mean, in terms of just thinking of solutions, I mean, I know those who are working in this market know about this, about this as an issue. I think in the longer term, as Shivraj and others were also pointing towards, there may be a value in exploring non-binding indicator libraries or reference sets. Of course, at the same time, this needs to be balanced carefully against the effort, cost, and also the market signals we are receiving to SD indicator reporting, right? And if SD reporting remains sort of primarily for reporting purposes or informational purposes, then very prescriptive or extremely sort of mandatory indicator requirements could just become more less practical and more burdensome without necessarily improving the outcomes. So I think there's a time element also to it, and it would be great to see how use and uptake of the SD tool kind of expands upon in the future. I also, and this would be my last point on this, I also think there's a space for cross-standard experience sharing, right, or co-recognition here. These are common questions, and I think they could be tackled in a common ground as well across standards. Thank you.
Yes, great. Thanks very much, Ritika. And yeah, let's turn to the next issue here, so that we can tackle the most broadness of issues here with time flying. So over to you, Martin. Maybe you could tell us a little more about gathering data at the national level. I think you made quite some mixed experience, both in Zambia, which is quite a carbon market pioneer, but at the same time, not having all the data in one place certainly was a challenge. And maybe you can enlighten us a little more, and maybe you also have suggestions on easing this task for project proponents. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Christoph. Yeah, so During the piloting, I think there was something that was running parallel in Zambia. I think Zambia by then was also developing a green finance taxonomy. So basically, it anchored like for, I think this is something that will be used way forward, especially to qualify project, let's say projects at carbon market. So basically, I think by then the discussions were like what some of the technical screening criteria that should be used. So we find like the way the technical screening criteria were designed, they also speak to some of the national documents and some of the stakeholders who are consulted under this. For instance, like they make substantial contribution. So basically, when we're looking at the during the piloting, so we looked at uh, national documents like the NDC, and also looked at the project documents such as the MIDD, just to look at in detail, like if the project making some substantial contribution to the national goals. Uh, we looked at some of the national documents such as the carbon market framework, the green growth strategy. All these were like to evaluate whether the project is making some substantial contribution on this. So you find like a number of cross-sectoral documents, including the specific document, especially the NH policy one, where the project was speaking to that specific sector. Again, we also looked at some of the policy document and strategies. So what was coming out, you find like you have like quite a number of documents just at one stage. Like for instance, from different sectors, you need to evaluate them. So you find yourself maybe entangled. You find like certain metrics that are being discussed in one policy document. They'll be different to the metrics that are in another policy document. So, but the most important part is that the can we call him the project developer for this doing this project for the project that was in discussion, the cafe sugar. So they provided like some of the documents like the MIDD, and they are very open for discussion. So basically, it also streamlined to see whether should we focus on other national documents, which might be produced even before even the market was well advanced. Then I think one thing that came out was to be strong was regarding the impact on the environment the project had. So again, it led to, for instance, you look at some of the national documents or like strategies regarding some of the environmental regulation that are followed. One thing that came out to be very important was that most of the project, they need to have an environmental impact assessment ready. Even maybe let me say, as they register it on the carbon register, or they want to undertake the activities under Article 6.2 or under 6.4, they need to have the environmental impact assessment report ready, because it provides most of the critical information, including the indicators. It provides the metrics. It also gives some threshold. It also shows the process on how stakeholders were consulted, which stakeholders were consulted. It also removes the aspect of duplication. Yeah. So again, the other thing, the last part was on the minimum social safeguards. So find like the tool itself, I think it had some guidance on the social aspect, the social impact. So basically, you find yourself discussing issues, let's say social aspects, let's say human rights abuse, labor laws. You also need to review those documents. So if you look at the SDGs that were impacted, it means for each SDG, you need to look at the labor laws or the national documents that are speaking to those, and also to check with the project documents to ensure like they're speaking to each other. So the data collection part, I think it was very extensive. It involves a lot of desktop reviews, stakeholder engagements, back and forth with the stakeholders. Sometimes it would create a situation whereby some stakeholders, they might even feel uncomfortable being asked certain questions, especially i- where communities are also involved. You find yourself maybe discussing things which cannot be discussed, because find like they might not understand what you are really trying to gather, and they might end up bringing out maybe other things that are not even part of the discussion, which maybe might have been discussed during the other consultation. Yeah, so one key takeaway was that you need to identify the stakeholders and the national documents and just have them in place as you do the piloting. Yeah.
All right. Thanks very much, Martin. Yeah, there's still quite a lot to do in this area, this is for sure, and it would certainly be nice to have some sort of a one-stop shop where project participants could look and find all the relevant document. But it's certainly acknowledged that this is something which is desirable, but certainly beyond the capacities of DNAs, at least for the moment. Yeah, there's quite some a number of questions coming in for the Q&A, and maybe Shivraj, if you allow me to rephrase the question towards you a little more, and maybe we can take up the first comment and question we got from Dino Yuda, rather looking at the recommendations, what we could recommend to the supervisory body and stakeholders, what they could do in order to scale and to further develop the tool, especially maybe with the view to digitalization. This is something which you had a special eye on, but maybe you have also some recommendations in terms of standardization, possibly.
Thanks, Christoph. Yeah, I think this is definitely in line with where we also want to push ahead. As Julian mentioned before, that conventional method of reporting, the Excel burden, as she called it, it's where free text could come in and it might become cumbersome and less objective. So digital approach is something where we can actually do the scale up. And where I think I would also like to share that the Sustain Cert was part of World Bank's Carbon Market Infrastructure Working Group, where it came up with the technical guidance in June 2025, where operationalization of a digital approach for the scalability is something that was discussed in detail. So I think the highest immediate values, we feel that harmonized terminology, I think even for digitization in order to scale it up. I think harmonized terminology, structured forms, basic cross to logic, it's really important because it will help with enhanced clarity, consistency and integrity without altering the nature of the tool. What we feel is that digitalization is really important if we want this to become more and more adopted easily, because it has multiple benefits as well. You see that not only from the point of view that when a project participant is trying to fill out the data, provide them the information in a more structured format, so therefore they they are able to, or they are, let's say, at ease when they are uploading the information there. It also gives UN and other interested bodies to take the information, because that format is applied throughout all the projects. Therefore, it makes it much more easier for them to extract the data and come out with the advice, policy matter. So basically, what we would recommend is that replace the static Excel-based templates with structured digital and smart ones like web-based forms and locked, which are locked, meaning that it's not like anybody can write anything, but it provides a proper guidance. Therefore, uniformity of the information that is being received is maintained. So logic enabled Excel templates, which are available on the web page, I think, where incorporating the mandatory fields and standardized response options, therefore to minimize, as I mentioned, that confusion. It doesn't become too text heavy. Sometimes one feels that the more context I provide, the more clear it becomes. It doesn't always work that way. So I think that is important. And regarding harmonizing response and logic terminology across all the forms like 15, 16, 17 becomes much more helpful, particularly in the distinction between not applicable, not claimed, impact, relevant, but neutral kind of things, that there it can really actually add value. And embedding guidance and micro clarifications. I think that will help a lot, like reducing the need for informal interpretation. I might interpret some things different from the other, and by nature auditors usually go with the harshest or the stringent interpretations. So in order to remove that bias of interpretation, let's make it as formal as possible. Therefore, see, the all these points, when you design a structure on which is digital, maybe web based, it helps you to bring out more consistent and clear inputs, and it also helps the other stakeholders to interpret it in the certain manner, and therefore the process becomes way faster, and the scalability is definitely achieved there. I think these are some points I wanted to share. Over to you, Crystal.
Thanks very much, and sorry for rushing you here. I wanted to take a few more questions, and I see there's a very lively discussion in the chat. I hope everyone can follow it. So some questions were already answered, thanks, Karen, or at least touched upon. And I see that we might not be able to touch upon every issue raised. So let me assure you, we'll be gladly taking questions also via email. We will show the contacts at the end of the session. So happy to do that. But for the moment, I think I'd like to focus on indicators, on the indicator question again, because there were quite a number of questions on this, and maybe there were some basic questions about the nature of indicators and the use of them, but also how project level indicators, how they could align in the absence of government level SD indicators, as many countries do not have them. Do not have sector level indicators. And also there was a question about is there any peer-reviewed literature on what was touched upon here today? Maybe we can look at these questions here. Maybe Ritika, would you come in on this again?
Sure, Christoph. I mean, of course, some of these questions are research questions, right? And I would look towards organizations like yourselves and UNEP for hopefully, carrying forward the good work that you have been doing for decades now on making these elements clear. But I mean, just maybe doing a bit of crystal ball gazing here, but I think there is possibility to kind of just split open on this argument to see where indicator development is possible and useful, and where it is a more contextual sort of interpretative aspect, where there's an interpretative aspect to it, right? As I tried to allude in my intervention, I think there's a small set of SDGs that where maybe project level indicators can be more directly developed because the causal link is more clearer, right? And in others, useful proxies could be generated. While there are those those can't happen, and I don't know if there's any sort of use any relevance in trying to kind of fit indicator sets in those towards those SDGs, right? In my sort of practitioner experience, and I look towards the other panelists and towards UNEP and Vupatel as well here to complement this. There are some sort of, for example, sector level indicators that have been developed across some other standards, right? Perhaps for me, one practical sort of point of reference could be to explore those tools and look at those indicators and see if your project can fulfill those, right? And if not, I would try to propose indicators of your own and see if in your host country approval process your host country actually attests to those, right? I think the question of what to do if there is no host country level targets towards certain SDG indicators, that's a complex one, but I also assume that maybe maybe in those cases you do have some universally applicable indicators as well. But having said that, I do think there is a space of an open research question here that systematically looks at SDG indicators and across different project types and sectors.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ritika. And yes, we actually did discuss this quite a lot when finalizing the report, and we'll gladly continue this work. There's still some things to look out next year, but we're also happy to find people who will actually also be in the position to fund activities on this. This will be capacity building also. Certainly warrants some further attention. Now, maybe if anyone of the panelists or from the audience would like to come in, I guess if you're ready, I'd like to do a final round with a view to the time. Is there anyone who would like to come in on this or any other aspect? Yes, great. Yuvraj, please go ahead.
Thank you, Christoph. Thanks, Karen and the panelists for a wonderful presentation, including Julian. One quick question is about the, already I think it was asked on the Q&A in terms of the sustained reporting of the Sustainable Development Indicators over a period of 10 years for any type of project. It could be small, medium, or large. After some time, there's going to be a stagnancy in terms of the SD indicators, which means you're going to repeat the same indicators time and again. I understand the overall evolution of SD is a continuous improvement process, but in terms of a project, it could be a stagnant situation as well. So there should be a kind of a categorization of evolving or transformational SD indicators and static indicators, because if you're talking about number of people or getting additional employment, could be stagnant after some period of time. So I think there has to be an element of understanding what are those indicators which require digitalization and what are those which doesn't require, because there could be too much of pressure in digitalization of everything versus understanding exactly how the SD indicators are reported. So the technology shouldn't precede the practical way of understanding the evolution of SD on a particular project. And that is going to be extremely important while you align with the government indicators. So is there any thought process in this, in the duration of your study? Did you analyze the static versus dynamic SD indicators? Thanks.
Right. Thanks for the interesting question. And yeah, thanks for Karen for stepping in. Go ahead.
Yes, I would just like to really shortly answer that question because we're a little over time. But the thoughts we had on the indicators when doing the study is that what sets the 6.4 tool apart from the VCM voluntary tools is that there's a requirement to assess both positive and negative impacts. And this is new. We did not have assessment of negative impacts. And it's not in the interest of a project developer to flag the negative impacts. These would not get a high price in the market, on the contrary. So that means when developing indicators, it's not a requirement as it stands that these need to be quantified. They can also be qualitative indicators assessed through, for instance, the stakeholder consultation process. And I think that also means that for qualitative impact indicators, it's a little more hard to digitize that, and that there would have to be a differentiation between what is then quantified and what is not quantified, but assessed more qualitatively. And we also discussed that it takes an effort to develop good indicators and to digitize them. So one would start with first things first, which could be, for instance, developing activity type specific indicators, looking at which methodology is now approved by the SBM, which is landfill gas. So maybe that's a good place to start. And then you could develop something, at least for a first pilot, try to how to digitize, how to develop activity-specific indicators. And by the way, this is also in the continuous improvement work program of the ICVCM. So working towards alignment on indicators in particular. Lots more to be done.
Yeah, thanks very much, Karen, for pointing to the alignment question also. And I'm afraid we ran out of time. Thank you very much for the very lively discussion. Before we close, I think we have one more slide where we can show the product, for example, the piloting report, and Andy just copied also the link to the website where you can access the report and also further information from the SDI in the chat. But as I said earlier, we're also happy to take any questions in other formats. For now, we have to close. I think it was very, very nice of all of you to come to this discussion here today. We very much appreciate you taking your time this very late in the year. So let me take it short here and say huge thanks, first of all, to our panelists. Ritika, I think she already had to leave. Thanks to Martin and Shivraj for sharing their insights and also for contributing to the piloting. Thanks to Juliana and Karen for your contributions, both work-wise and also here today. And also a huge thanks to Andy Zanuzzi and Brian Oronos of UNEP CCC, who are also part of the SDI team and who contributed significantly to the whole SDI project, but also to the piloting work and to conceptualizing and conducting this webinar. Thank you, guys. Last but not least, thanks to all of you in the audience for taking the time and for all your questions, which actually underlines that we touched something important, and that the nexus of sustainable development and carbon markets is something important to work on and to continuously improve. Happy to continue next year. Thanks very much to all of you, and see you in some other context. Have a good time, and also look forward to hopefully you can take a break towards the end of the year. For now, thank you, and see you. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.